look over our list, usually we can go, phew, no wonder I feel a little stressed. And if your list isn't long enough, talk to your neighbors. They can probably give you a few extras. Or talk to your upline, your supervisors. Second way of looking at this then is when I look over all of these stressors, these demands being made on me today, which ones do I have some potential control over? In other words, which things am I putting on myself? Which things are things over which I have no control? In those areas where we have no control, how can I, then the next thing to start to figure out is, how can I at least protect myself from them? How do I work on them in such a way to begin to minimize their impact on me? Those things that I have more control over. And the other thing, with those areas over which we have no control, absolute no control, probably a good idea to stop worrying about those. In the sense of worrying about them to the degree that it's impacting us on a daily basis. Or save time limited. So with all the things we have going on in politics today, I have no control other than every November that I get a chance to vote over lots of things that are happening up there. So if I can't control it, how do I limit its influence on me? I restrict the amount of time I spend looking at news stuff. Then I want to balance some of that with looking at things of puppies playing. Or little kids playing in a playground. I want to balance some of those things with, because I can influence that, I can control that. How much exposure that I'm putting out there, and how much exposure do I want to put into fun kind of things. Again, looking for balances in there. Okay. So when you take a look at this list, and by the end of our talk today, I want you to start to think about and plan for, so how can I minimize some of the impact of things over which I have no control, and over the things that I do have control, how can I reform the mix of them to make sure I've got some balance in. Stress signals. How does your stress show up? Think for a moment. How do you know when you are stressed? How do you know when you are getting over-stressed? How do you know when stress is starting to bother you? What are your earliest warning signals? And if you sit there and say, I don't know, this is a good time to start figuring that out. Okay? Sometimes our significant others, if we have them, or our best friends, are good ones to point it out to us. If I come home and my wife says, why are you so crabby? And I go, why, I'm not crabby. Oops. Okay, well, maybe I am. Maybe I need to sit down and start thinking about what's the crabbiness coming from? And do I have something I can do about it? Or do I just need to accept it and move forward on it? So figuring out what are your earliest warning systems. I like to try to figure it out before my wife points out that I'm getting crabby, because usually by the time I get to that, the crabbiness has affected kind of what the home environment's going to be for a while, and I have to clean up after myself, and I prefer not to do that whenever I can avoid it. So if I can head it off sooner. What are your earliest? I know one of my earliest warning systems tend to be as I start losing things. Okay? I can't find things. I can look at the piles of paper on my desk and not remember what's in them or where something is. A classic example was I was in a cube, open office environment. Somebody came in and asked me for something. I had to go to a drawer to pull it out. I gave it to them. And when they left, I couldn't find my cup of coffee. And the office was not that big. So I'm looking all over, I can't, and then I begin to, okay, were you hallucinating? I'm pretty sure I just recently went and filled up my coffee cup. And I had memory of doing it, but Was I hallucinating that? And I found it 2 days later. I had set it down behind a picture. Okay, and it was just enough out of sight. And it was a perfect place to set it down while I was pulling stuff out, but it was someplace I would never, ever put a coffee cup. That was an indicator to me that, okay, stress level is a little high, maybe you need to take a look at what's kind of going on. Because, I don't know about you, for me, losing a cup of caffeine early in the morning, not a good sign. It's not a good sign. Okay? So what are your early warning symptoms? What is your stress level? So I've got a highly scientific picture here. It shows a picture of 2 dolphins. So I want everybody to take a second. A slow, deep breath. In. Out. And I'm going to show you the picture. And if you see the 2 dolphins, everything's great. See anything about them, maybe you're stressed a little too high. This really has a purpose, this whole picture. All right, you know you're really stressed when one digit on your right hand really has a great desire to show up on a regular basis. So when we're under stress, it really only affects us in 5 areas of our life. Okay? It affects us cognitively, it affects us emotionally, it affects us behaviorally, and it affects us physically. And the 5th area is it affects us spiritually. Okay? So stress has the ability to affect us in all 5 dimensions of our life. Okay? On the feeling side, the emotional side, anxiety, irritability, fear, moodiness, embarrassment, sense of blues. On the positive side, stress also can give us, the positive side, the eustress kind of stuff can give us feelings of more euphoric and feeling good when we have some successes. We are our own worst critics. Okay? So when we are under stress, human beings are genetically programmed to spend more time paying attention to the negative than we are the positive. And I think this again comes from our earliest ancestors, in which it was absolutely necessary for survival of the species to pay attention to the bad stuff and avoid that and try to get over here to the more good stuff. The problem with it today in our 21st century again is if we're only paying attention to that bad stuff, the negative stuff, we're not paying attention enough to kind of what's going on in your life today, right now, that's okay. Not good, necessarily, but what's going on in your life right now, that's okay to good. Okay? So we had a beautiful weekend, sunshine, warmth, wonderfulness. And then there's today. Okay. So welcome to May in Michigan, where we can have 70-degree day one day and 45-degree weather the next. Okay. So how much time do we want to spend lamenting? Or how much time do we want to spend, well, at least with this little cooler and the water that's coming down, the rain that's coming down, is going to make the trees pop even more, and the grass grow, and the flowers rise, and all that kind of good thing. Where can I look for the okay parts of this? And oh, by the way, I gotta be inside all day anyway, or in my car driving around to make home calls or whatever. And if I gotta be inside, it may as well be kind of cool and miserable out, as long as it's really nice on that weekend when I might have a chance to be out inside. Okay, so when you think about, again, it's this, the idea being is when we start into the pity pot side of stopping a minute and what do I have going on? Okay, we're all upright and taking nourishment this morning. That's the beginning of any kind of good day, if we can get up and take nourishment. You got a job, you got some money coming in, you got a dog that loves you, or you got a cat that ignores you in a loving manner. Okay? Okay? So, when it gets on the negative side of us, the self-criticism, the woe is me, the difficulty concentrating. I was working with somebody yesterday afternoon, and her stress level is skyrocketing, and it's around, she is moving out of one school system into another, and the debate is, so do I try to have, she's got a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old. Do I move them to the new school? Do I leave them in because the other school has a better reputation? Gee, if I come over here, then, but I got to do that, I got to drive 40 minutes to get them to, and I got to be there to pick them up from. Okay, or do I go to this other school that's 6 minutes away? And she's really wrestling with this. And part of my discussion with her was, well, let's look at the pros and cons of it then. Let's make out a sheet. What's the pros and cons of the school system? Good school system, downside, 1 hour and a half commute to get to and from the school. And oh, by the way, one of the other downsides of that is all the neighborhood friends that hopefully they'll be making by living in the new environment when we go to that school. Play dates are going to be more difficult. So that's a con. Okay? So what are the pros here? Well, the latest reports of the Grand Rapids Public School System that was out just recently, their graduation rates are going up. They're really improving in lots of different ways. Okay? So there's some indications of survival if you get into the Grand Rapids Public School System. Closer by, normal environment, kids have more time to play, not so much car time back and forth. What are you going to do? So she's back and forth, and he said, okay, here's a suggestion. What's all the pros and cons of every school that you're looking at? And then establish that on such and such a day, I'm going to make a decision. In the next week, I'm going to make a decision, and I'm going to live with that decision. Because once you make the decision, the weight is lifted off your shoulder. You have to deal with the consequences of it, positive and negative. But make the decision, because otherwise you're just going to vibrate all summer long. Make the decision now. Behaviors, obviously, the grumpiness is physically acted out. Actively, impulsively. Sometimes we go to our comfort substances, alcohol, nicotine, food. For women it tends to be chocolate, for men it tends to be something salty. So I have the best of both worlds. I like chocolate covered pretzels. I like to be in touch with my feminine side, with my masculine side. Low comfort food probably okay from time to time, but when it becomes chronic, yeah, maybe not so much. Physical symptoms, stress related. Okay. Every time, part of stress comes out of our amygdala back here. And our amygdala is in charge of survival. And so when it perceives a threat, and it's not a rational part of the brain, it's a responding to the environment part of the brain. And it puts out adrenaline, cortisol, and other stress chemicals that prepares us to act on the perceived threat. Okay? So it's a really good thing when suddenly the brake lights on the car in front of us come on, that before we consciously think about anything, we've got our right foot on that brake pushing it through the floorboard. And that happens instantaneously before the brain, the front part of the brain, assimilates the information. So in dangerous situations, it's absolutely flooded with adrenaline, prepares to fight or flight, absolutely a good thing. When it's kind of chronic and low key, but it's always there, and we're not doing anything to take care of it, it's debilitating to our bodies. So, again, it kind of comes down to when we have worries, what keeps us awake at night? The sleep people, sleep hygienists, tell us that we should be getting somewhere between 6.5 and 8 hours of sleep a night. 7 nights a week. We should be going to bed about the same time and getting up about the same time, 7 days a week. Sleeping in on weekends does not make up for sleep deprivation during the week. Feels good, but it overall does not do anything for our body. We need roughly 6.5 hours to 8 hours because we need at least four cycles of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. REM sleep occurs about every 90 minutes. And it's called REM sleep because our eyes literally go back and forth. And it's the time of our sleep cycle in which the brain is processing the events of the day, our worries of the day, and putting it into the memory folders, hopefully in the appropriate ones. If we've had a trauma memory, it sometimes puts it in the wrong folders, and the emotional charge that goes with the memory stays with it. But under processing, and when it processes it normally, the emotional charge diminishes and goes away. An example, think about when you were a kid, last year, from my perspective. When you were a kid, young kid, best Christmas present you ever got. Think about that just for a second, whatever it was. And when we pull that memory up, we get kind of a little smile, we get a little, oh yeah, man, that was really cool. But what did you feel like at the moment that you got that present? Wow, this is the greatest present, right? You had a big charge to it, but you slept on it, and the memory charge gets put, and now we get a little bit. Okay, get a little bit. The trauma memories, if they're not processed right, when we pull the memory back up, we get the full charge. So that's the example. So when we think about what keeps us up at night, where are those worries? And again, it kind of comes back to, if I've got things that are keeping me up at night, what can I do about that? Are there things over which I can exert some control or some influence and process them in a way that I can let them go or come up with a game plan for dealing with them? If you have trouble going to sleep at night, again, the sleep folks say, we have to convince ourselves that a bed is only for two purposes, sleep and fun. Okay? It's not a place to lay and worry. It's not a place to watch television. It's not a place to problem solve. For its purposes is for rest or relaxation kind of thing. They talk about if you can't get to sleep in 30 minutes, get up and then go do something else. Watch Nickelodeon, watch home TV, nothing that is really interesting. Read your favorite math textbook. Nothing that is engaging, something that gets your mind off whatever it is that you've been thinking about, but doesn't truly engage it until you get that sleepy time. But start to work on those kinds. The reverse side, what kind of things get you up in the morning? Okay. A guy named Ray Flannery. He writes books on violence, preventing violence and assessing violence and so on. And he talks about there are 3 ingredients that a person needs to have that in spite of making the perfect profile of the violent person, if he has these 3 characteristics, it lessens the likelihood that he will commit a violent act. And when I read his books and I went to a couple of workshops with him, it occurred to me that those 3 ingredients, I believe, are things that we need in our lives to feel okay, to live a life of reasonable contentment. And I had a chance, we were at a conference together, and I was sitting next to him at dinner, and I talked to him about it, and he thought for a minute and said, well, intuitively it makes sense, but as a scientist, I've never studied it. So if you tell people that, you have to put this caveat in. That's